$12. That's what they paid for Martha Wheeler and her 3 children. The auctioneer's hammer cracked like a gunshot, and the crowd dispersed like they'd just bought cattle, not a pregnant woman begging for mercy. 5-year-old Grace hadn't spoken in 6 weeks. 7-year-old Tommy was crying so hard he couldn't breathe. 10-year-old Samuel stood in front of his mother with his fists raised, ready to fight grown men twice his size. And the stranger who'd just bought them, a man with dead eyes and blood on his knuckles, was walking toward them through the snow. If you're watching from somewhere in this wide world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about mercy, survival, and what it really means to choose family when the whole world has already thrown you away. The hammer fell. Martha felt it in her bones, that final crack of wood against wood that meant her children now belonged to someone else. She pulled Grace tighter against her chest and watched the stranger count out bills with hands that looked like they'd broken things. Broken people. "Mama!" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "Mama, I'm scared." "Hush, baby." "But Mama, I said hush." Samuel stepped closer to her, his small body rigid with fury. "I won't let him take us. I'll fight him, Mama. I'll kill him if I have to." "You'll do no such thing." Martha grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise. "You'll stay quiet and you'll stay alive. That's all that matters now. You hear me?" Samuel's jaw clenched, but he nodded. The stranger finished counting. He handed the bills to the auctioneer without looking at him, then turned and walked toward Martha through the crowd. People parted for him like water around a stone. Nobody met his eyes. Martha understood why when he got close. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair going gray at the temples, and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Empty, flat. The eyes of a man who'd seen too much and stopped caring about any of it. "You Martha Wheeler?" His voice was low, rough. "Yes." "These your children?" "Yes." He looked at Samuel, at Tommy still crying, at Grace's blank face pressed against Martha's shoulder. Then he looked at her belly, swollen with the child she'd been carrying for 6 months. "That one too?" Martha's hand moved protectively over her stomach. "Yes." The stranger nodded once. "My wagon's at the end of the street. We leave in 10 minutes. You got belongings?" "Nothing." The word tasted like ash. "They took everything." "Then we leave now." He turned and started walking. Martha didn't move. The stranger stopped, turned back. Something flickered in those dead eyes. Not anger, not impatience, just a kind of weary resignation. "You coming or not?" "Where are you taking us?" "My ranch, 20 miles north." "Why?" The question hung in the frozen air between them. Behind Martha, she could feel the crowd watching, waiting, hungry for whatever came next. The stranger looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I got $12 worth of reasons to keep you alive. And because where I'm taking you, nobody's going to sell you again." He turned and kept walking. Martha looked down at her children, at Samuel's fury, at Tommy's terror, at Grace's terrible silence. Then she followed the stranger into the snow. The wagon was old but solid, pulled by 2 horses that stamped impatiently in the cold. The stranger helped Martha climb up onto the bench seat, his grip firm but not rough, then lifted Tommy and Grace into the back, where blankets had been spread over hay. Samuel refused his help. He climbed up himself, glaring at the stranger the whole time. "Stubborn," the stranger said. It wasn't a question. He's protective. He's 10. He's been the man of our family for 4 months. Martha's voice hardened. Since his father died in a mine collapse and left us with nothing but debts and a brother-in-law who thinks he owns us. The stranger's eyes flickered, just for a second. Ezra Wheeler. Martha's blood froze. How do you know that name? I know a lot of names. He climbed onto the bench beside her and took the reins. Ezra Wheeler's been putting the word out for 3 months, looking for his brother's widow and her children, offering money for information. And you're going to turn us in? If I was going to turn you in, I wouldn't have paid $12 for you. He clicked his tongue and the horses started moving. I would have just told the auctioneer who you were and collected the reward. Martha's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs to make them stop.
Then why did you buy us?
The stranger didn't answer for a long moment. They passed the last buildings of town, and the open prairie spread out before them, white and endless under a sky the color of iron. My name's Elijah Stone, he said finally. I had a wife once, Catherine, and 2 daughters, Emma and Lily. Had. The word sat between them like a stone. What happened to them? Fever, 4 years ago. Elijah's voice was flat, empty. I was away when it started, tracking a man who'd killed 3 people in Denver. By the time I got back, Catherine was already dead. Emma died 2 days later. Lily lasted a week. Martha closed her eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just understand. Elijah kept his eyes on the road. I spent 4 years in that cabin alone, trying to forget what I lost. And then I rode into town this morning for supplies and saw them selling a pregnant woman and her children like livestock. Saw a 10-year-old boy ready to fight grown men to protect his mother. Saw a little girl who hasn't spoken in 6 weeks because the world broke her so bad she forgot how to use words. He turned and looked at Martha directly. His eyes weren't empty anymore. They were burning. I couldn't save my family, Elijah said, but maybe I can save yours. They rode in silence for an hour. Martha kept checking on the children. Tommy had cried himself to sleep, curled up under the blankets with his thumb in his mouth like he was 5 instead of 7. Grace lay beside him, awake but staring at nothing, her small hand clutching a fold of the blanket like it was the only solid thing in the world. Samuel sat apart from them, rigid and watchful, his eyes fixed on Elijah's back. Your boy hates me, Elijah said. He doesn't know you. That's why he hates me. Elijah adjusted the reins. Give him time. He'll either learn to trust me or he won't. Either way, I'm not going to force it. What about the others? The little one, Tommy? He's scared. That's normal. He'll calm down once he sees I'm not going to hurt him. Elijah paused. The girl's different. Grace. Martha's voice cracked on the name. She used to be the loudest of all of them, singing, talking, asking questions about everything. Now she won't even look at me. She saw something. She saw her father die. The words came out before Martha could stop them. The mine collapse. She was there when they brought the bodies up. She saw William's face. Elijah was quiet for a long moment. How old was she? 5. She turned 5 3 days before it happened. Jesus. Don't. Martha's voice was sharp. Don't you dare pity her. She doesn't need pity. She needs time and safety and someone who isn't going to treat her like she's broken. I wasn't going to say she was broken. Elijah's voice was gentle. I was going to say, I understand. Martha looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, the gray in his hair, the scars on his hands. How could you possibly understand? Because my daughter Lily was 4 when she died. And in that last week, when the fever was burning her up and she knew she wasn't going to make it. She stopped talking too. Just looked at me with these big eyes, like she was trying to tell me something, but couldn't find the words. Elijah's jaw tightened. I still don't know what she was trying to say. Martha didn't know what to respond to that, so she said nothing. They rode on. The ranch appeared as the sun was starting to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and red. It was small, a log cabin, a barn, a chicken coop, and a corral where 2 horses stood watching their approach. It's not much, Elijah said, but it's warm and it's safe, and nobody knows it exists except me. And now us. And now you. He pulled the wagon up in front of the cabin and climbed down, then helped Martha after. His hands were careful, mindful of her belly. Samuel. Elijah looked up at the boy, who was still sitting rigid in the wagon bed. Help your brother and sister down. Your mother needs to rest. Samuel's eyes narrowed. Don't tell me what to do. Samuel. Martha's voice was a warning. It's fine. Elijah held up a hand. Boy's got every right to be angry. But anger won't keep his family warm tonight. Work will. He looked at Samuel steadily. You want to protect them? Help me get them inside. Then you can hate me all you want. Samuel's jaw worked. For a moment, Martha thought he would refuse. Then he turned and lifted Grace down from the wagon, careful and gentle despite his fury. Tommy followed, stumbling on sleepy legs. Samuel caught him before he could fall. Inside, Elijah said. Fire's still burning. Get warm. The children went. Samuel led the way, Grace's hand clutched in his, Tommy trailing behind. Martha watched them go, then turned to Elijah. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He started unhitching the horses. We've got a long winter ahead, and a man hunting you who isn't going to stop. $12 bought you time, Mrs. Wheeler. What we do with that time is what matters. Martha. Elijah paused. What? My name is Martha. If we're going to be living under the same roof, you might as well use it. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Martha it is. The cabin was small, but well kept. One main room with a fireplace and a cook stove. One bedroom off to the side. A loft above for storage. The children had gathered near the fire. Tommy pressed against Samuel's side. Grace sitting apart and staring at the flames. Martha moved to them immediately, running her hands over their faces, checking for frostbite, for injury, for any damage the day had done that couldn't be seen. I'm fine, Mama. Samuel pushed her hands away. Stop fussing. I'll stop fussing when you're grown and gone. Until then, you'll let me fuss. She turned to Tommy. How are your toes, baby? Cold. Tommy's voice was small. But not hurting anymore. That's good. That means the blood's moving. Martha looked at Grace. And you, sweetheart? How are you feeling? Grace didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge that Martha had spoken. Martha's heart cracked a little more. The door opened and Elijah came in, stamping snow off his boots. He carried an armload of firewood and stacked it beside the hearth. Horses are bedded down. I'll cook something in a minute, but first. He crossed to a trunk in the corner and pulled out blankets, thick wool, worn soft with use. These'll help. The bedroom's through that door. You and the children can have it. I'll sleep in the loft. We can't take your bed, Martha protested. You can, and you will. Elijah's tone left no room for argument. You're pregnant, exhausted, and half frozen. The children need their mother rested. I've slept in that loft before. It's fine. Martha wanted to argue, but Tommy was already drooping against Samuel's shoulder, and Grace hadn't moved from her spot by the fire, and the baby was kicking like it wanted to escape, and she was so tired she could barely think. "Thank you," she said again. Elijah just nodded and went to the stove. Dinner was simple: salt pork, beans, bread that was a day old but still soft enough to eat. The children fell on it like they hadn't seen food in days, which, Martha realized, wasn't far from the truth. She ate too, though the food sat heavy in her stomach. Watching Elijah move around the cabin, watching him fill plates and pour water and tend the fire, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. She didn't trust it, couldn't trust it, but it was there, warm and strange and terrifying. After dinner, she put the children to bed. Tommy went down easy, exhausted past the point of resistance. Grace followed without protest, curling into a tight ball under the blankets with her back to the room. Samuel refused to sleep in the bedroom. "I'll stay out here," he said, his chin jutting stubbornly. "Someone needs to keep watch." "Samuel, let him," Elijah's voice came from the main room. "There's a pallet by the fire. He can sleep there if he wants." Martha looked at her son, at the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his thin shoulders, the way he held himself like a soldier waiting for battle. "Fine," she said softly. "But Samuel, try to sleep, please." "I will, Mama." He wouldn't. She knew it. But she was too tired to fight. She went into the bedroom and closed the door, and the last thing she heard before sleep took her was the low murmur of Elijah's voice, saying something to Samuel that she couldn't quite make out. Martha woke to darkness and the sound of crying. She was on her feet before her eyes fully opened, moving toward the sound, her heart pounding. Tommy. It had to be Tommy. He'd had nightmares ever since the mine collapse, waking up screaming for his father. But when she reached the main room, she found something else. Grace was standing by the window, tears streaming down her face, her small hands pressed against the glass. She wasn't making noise, wasn't sobbing or wailing, just crying silently, the way she'd done everything silently for the past 6 weeks. And Elijah was crouched beside her, not touching, not speaking, just there. "Grace," Martha rushed forward. "Baby, what's wrong?" Grace didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on something outside, something Martha couldn't see. "She woke up about an hour ago." Elijah's voice was quiet. "Came out here and went straight to the window. I think she's looking for something." "For what?" "I don't know." Martha knelt beside her daughter, trying to see what Grace was seeing. There was nothing outside but snow and darkness and the faint outline of the barn. "Grace, sweetheart, can you tell Mama what you're looking for?" "Nothing." "Is it Papa? Are you looking for Papa?" Grace's tears fell faster, but she still didn't speak. Martha felt something inside her break. She gathered Grace into her arms and held her tight, rocking back and forth, murmuring words that meant nothing, because nothing could mean anything to a child who'd seen her father's broken body pulled from a collapsed mine. Elijah stood and moved away, giving them space. But he didn't go far. He sat at the table, watching, his eyes dark with something Martha didn't have the strength to name. Eventually, Grace cried herself out. Her small body went limp against Martha's chest, and her breathing evened out into sleep. Martha carried her back to the bedroom and laid her beside Tommy, who hadn't stirred. Then she stood there, looking down at her children, and felt the weight of everything she couldn't fix, pressing down on her like a physical thing. She's dreaming about him. Martha turned. Elijah stood in the doorway, his shoulder against the frame. About William? About whoever she lost. The dreams are how the grief comes out when you can't let it out any other way. He paused. My daughter Lily did the same thing. Toward the end, she'd stand at the window and cry, and when I asked her what was wrong, she'd just look at me with those big eyes. I never figured out what she was trying to tell me. Martha's throat was too tight to speak. "Come on," Elijah said gently. I made coffee. You should drink something before you go back to sleep. They sat at the table while the children slept and the fire burned low. Martha wrapped her hands around the tin cup and let the warmth seep into her bones. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. What you said earlier about being a bounty hunter, about tracking men for money. Martha looked at him over the rim of her cup. Did you kill them? The men you hunted? Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Some of them. Did they deserve it? Most of them. His eyes met hers. But not all. And the ones who didn't, those are the ones I see when I close my eyes at night. Then why did you do it? Because I was good at it. Because it paid well. Because it was the only thing I knew how to do. He set down his cup. I grew up in a hard place, Martha. My father was a drunk who beat my mother until she died, and then he beat me until I got big enough to beat him back. By the time I was 15, I'd already killed a man. By 20, I'd killed a dozen. The law called it justice. I called it survival. Either way, it made me what I am. And what are you? Dangerous. The word came out flat. Broken. The kind of man decent people cross the street to avoid. He looked at her. Catherine saw something else in me. Something I didn't even know was there. She made me believe I could be different. And for a while, I was. I had a home and a family and a reason to be better than what I'd been. And then you lost them. And then I lost them. And I've spent 4 years trying to figure out what a man's supposed to do when the only good thing in his life gets taken away. Martha understood that. Understood it in her bones. And what did you figure out? Elijah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Nothing. Not a damn thing. I just kept going because stopping felt like giving up, and giving up felt like letting Catherine down. That's not nothing. It's not much. It's more than most people manage. Martha set down her cup. Elijah, I need you to understand something. I'm grateful for what you did today. More grateful than I can say. But I can't be another reason for you to live. I can't be a replacement for what you lost. If that's what you're looking for. It's not, Elijah cut her off. I'm not looking for a replacement. Catherine was Catherine. No one else could ever be her. But standing in that crowd today, watching them sell you and your children like you were livestock, I felt something I haven't felt in 4 years. What? Anger. His eyes met hers. Real anger. The kind that burns. The kind that makes you want to tear the whole damn world apart. He leaned forward. Your brother-in-law, Ezra Wheeler. He did this to you. He's the reason you ended up on that auction block. He's the reason your children are terrified and your daughter can't speak and you're running for your life with a baby in your belly. Yes. Then here's what I want. Elijah's voice was low, intense. I want to make sure he never touches you again. I want to put my body between him and your children and let him know that if he comes for you, he'll have to go through me first. I want to give you a safe place to have your baby and raise your children and figure out what comes next. Martha stared at him. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, and because I've spent 4 years doing nothing that mattered. This matters. You matter. And maybe if I can save you, I can start to forgive myself for not being able to save them. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Martha reached across the table and laid her hand over his. His fingers were rough, scarred, warm. Okay, she said softly. Okay. The next 3 days passed in a careful rhythm. Elijah showed Samuel how to care for the horses, and the boy's hostility thawed just slightly when he discovered that the mare named Bessie would eat sugar cubes from his palm. Tommy attached himself to Elijah's shadow, asking endless questions about everything: the animals, the land, how to start a fire, why snow was cold. "He's never had a father who talked to him," Martha explained when she saw Elijah's surprise at Tommy's attention. "William was a good man, but he was always working, always tired. He didn't have time for questions." "Then I'll make time," Elijah said, and Martha felt something warm bloom in her chest. Grace remained apart. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, eating when food was put in front of her, sleeping when Martha put her to bed, but never engaging, never responding. Until the 4th day. Elijah was sitting at the table, working on a piece of leather with a needle and thread. Martha was mending one of Samuel's shirts. Tommy was playing with a set of wooden blocks Elijah had carved years ago for Lily. Grace came out of the bedroom and stood in the middle of the room, watching Elijah work. He noticed, but didn't look up. "Morning, Grace." She didn't answer, but she came closer. Martha held her breath. Grace stopped at the edge of the table, her eyes fixed on Elijah's hands as they moved over the leather. "You want to see?" Elijah held up the piece he was working on. "It's a halter for Bessie. The old one was getting worn out." Grace reached out one small finger and touched the leather, ran her fingertip along the stitching. Elijah glanced at Martha. She nodded. He pulled a small scrap of leather from his pile and handed it to Grace, along with a piece of heavy thread. "Here, you try." Grace took the materials and sat down on the floor. She turned the leather over in her hands, studying it. Then she picked up the thread. Martha's eyes filled with tears. It was such a small thing, such a tiny moment. But it was the first time in 6 weeks that Grace had shown interest in anything. Elijah went back to his work like nothing had happened, but Martha saw the corner of his mouth twitch, just slightly. Progress. The 5th day brought trouble. They were eating breakfast when they heard hoofbeats. Elijah was on his feet before Martha could react, rifle in hand. "Bedroom, now, all of you!" Martha grabbed Grace. Samuel grabbed Tommy. They ran. In the bedroom, Martha pressed her ear to the door and listened. "Hello, the cabin!" A man's voice, muffled by distance and wood. "Who's asking?" Elijah's voice, hard and flat. "Deputy Marshal Caleb Mercer, out of Silver Creek. Looking for Elijah Stone." Silver Creek, Ezra's town. Martha's heart stopped. "What do you want?" Elijah asked. "Need to talk. About a woman named Martha Wheeler. She's wanted." Silence. Long silence. Then Elijah said, "Come in slow. Keep your hands where I can see them." The door opened. Footsteps. Martha pressed harder against the wood, trying to hear. "Ezra Wheeler's got men searching every cabin between here and Denver." The deputy's voice was tired. "I'm supposed to report back if I find her." "Is that so?" "It is, and I rode a long way to deliver that message personally, instead of sending someone else." A pause. Then Elijah said, "Why would you do that?" "Because I remember what you did for me in Leadville. You could have left me for dead and taken the bounty yourself. You didn't." The deputy paused. "So I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to ride out of here and forget I ever saw this place." "I'm listening." "Marry her." Martha's breath caught. "Make it legal. Make it witnessed. Make it something Wheeler can't touch. Right now, she's a runaway widow, and those children are his brother's orphans. He's got legal standing to claim them. But if she's your wife, different story. different law. Silence stretched. Then Elijah said, "Thank you, Caleb." "Don't thank me. Just do it fast. Wheeler's not going to stop." Footsteps moved toward the door. "Take care of yourself, Stone. And take care of them." The door opened, closed. Hoofbeats faded into the distance. Martha stood frozen in the bedroom, her hand pressed to her pounding heart, Elijah's words echoing in her head. Marry her. The door swung open. Elijah stood there, his face unreadable. "You heard," he said. "Yes." "Then you know what has to happen." Martha looked at her children, at Samuel's fierce protectiveness, at Tommy's fear, at Grace clutching her leather scrap like a lifeline. She looked at her belly, at the child growing inside her, who deserved a chance to be born into something other than running. She looked at Elijah Stone, this stranger who'd bought them for $12 and given them shelter without asking for anything in return. "Yes," Martha said, "I know." And outside, the snow began to fall again. The door closed behind the deputy, and the cabin fell silent. Martha stood in the bedroom doorway, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the frame. Her children huddled behind her, Samuel tense and watchful, Tommy confused, Grace clutching her leather scrap like it was the only real thing in the world. Elijah set his rifle against the wall. He didn't look at her. "You heard what he said." "I heard." "Then you know." "I know what he suggested." Martha's voice came out steadier than she felt. "That doesn't mean I know what to do about it." Elijah turned then. His eyes met hers across the small room, and Martha saw something in them she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. This man who'd killed people, who'd tracked criminals across territories, who'd faced down death more times than she could imagine. He was uncertain. "I'm not going to force you into anything." His voice was rough. "What Caleb said, it's just one option. There are others." "What others?" "We could run, head north, try to make it to Canada before spring. Or go east, lose ourselves in a city big enough that Ezra would never find us." "You said yourself I can't keep running, not in my condition." "I know what I said." "Then what are you suggesting?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "I'm suggesting you have a choice. You always have a choice, Martha. That's the whole damn point. You've spent months being chased by a man who thinks he owns you. I'm not going to be another man who makes decisions for you." Martha felt tears burn behind her eyes. She blinked them back. "And if I choose to marry you, what then?" "Then we go to town tomorrow. Find Reverend Crane. Make it legal." Elijah paused. "And then we wait for Ezra to come, and we show him that you're not his to take anymore." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Samuel stepped forward, his small fists clenched. "You can't marry him, Mama. You don't even know him." "Samuel, he bought us, like we were cattle, like we were things." The boy's voice cracked. "Papa's only been dead 4 months, and you're going to marry the first stranger who comes along?" The words hit Martha like a slap. She saw Elijah flinch too, just slightly. "Samuel, listen to me." Martha crouched down so she was eye level with her son. "I loved your father. I will always love your father. But your father is gone, and I have to keep you safe. All of you. If marrying Mr. Stone means Uncle Ezra can't take you away from me, then that's what I'm going to do." "But, no buts." Martha gripped his shoulders. "You're 10 years old. You've been carrying this family on your back for 4 months, and I'm so proud of you I could burst. But this isn't your decision to make. It's mine, and I need you to trust me." Samuel's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "I don't trust him." "You don't have to trust him. You just have to trust me." For a long moment, the boy stared at her. Then his shoulders slumped, and he nodded once, small and defeated. Martha pulled him into a hug. Over his head, she met Elijah's eyes. "Tomorrow," she said. "We'll go tomorrow." That night, after the children were asleep, Martha found Elijah sitting on the porch despite the cold. Snow drifted down around him, catching in his hair, melting on his shoulders. He didn't seem to notice. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside him. "You should be sleeping," Elijah said, without looking at her. "So should you." "I don't sleep much." "Neither do I. Not anymore." They sat in silence, watching the snow fall. The world was quiet, muffled, like everything beyond the porch had ceased to exist. "Your boy's right, you know." Elijah's voice was soft. "You don't know me. Not really. You're about to bind yourself to a stranger because a deputy told you it was the smart thing to do." "I'm binding myself to you because it's the only thing that makes sense." Martha pulled the blanket tighter. "Ezra has the law on his side. He has money and connections and men willing to do whatever he tells them. I have nothing except 3 children and a baby on the way and the clothes on my back. You're offering me a chance to fight back. How could I say no to that?" "You could say no because you deserve better," Martha laughed, short and bitter. "Better than what? A warm cabin? A man who treats my children with kindness? Safety from the monster who's been hunting us for 3 months?" She shook her head. "I've had better, Elijah. I had William, and William is dead. So now I have to make do with what's in front of me." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll try to be a good husband to you." "I'm not asking for a good husband. I'm asking for protection." "You'll have both." He turned to look at her. "I meant what I said before. I'm not going to touch you. Not going to ask for anything you don't want to give. This marriage, it's a shield, nothing more. You'll have your own bed, your own space, your own life. I'm just the name on the paper that keeps Ezra away." Martha studied his face in the dim light from the cabin window. The hard lines, the old scars, the weariness that seemed carved into his bones. "And what do you get out of it?" "Purpose." The word came out flat. "Something to do besides wait to die." "That's not enough." "It's more than I've had in 4 years." Martha reached out and touched his hand. His fingers were cold, rough with calluses, but they curled around hers without hesitation. "We're both broken," she said softly. "Both carrying things we can't put down. Maybe that's why this works." "Does it work?" "I don't know yet." She squeezed his hand. "But I'm willing to find out." Elijah looked at their joined hands for a long moment. Then he lifted her fingers to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, gentle as a prayer. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll find out tomorrow." Morning came gray and cold. Martha woke the children early and dressed them in the cleanest clothes they had, which wasn't saying much. Tommy's shirt had a tear in the sleeve that she'd mended twice. Samuel's pants were an inch too short. Grace's dress hung on her thin frame like a sack. But they were clean, and they were alive, and today, Martha was going to make sure they stayed that way. Elijah had the wagon hitched by the time they came outside. He helped Martha up onto the bench seat, then lifted Tommy and Grace into the back. Samuel climbed up himself, as usual, refusing any assistance. "Town's about 3 hours, Elijah said as he took the reins. "We'll find the Reverend, get the paper signed, and be back before dark." "Will people ask questions?" "Probably. Let me handle it." They rode in silence for the first hour. The snow had stopped overnight, but the sky was still heavy with clouds, and the air bit at any exposed skin. Martha kept checking on the children, making sure they were warm enough, making sure Grace hadn't retreated further into herself. Tommy broke the silence first. "Mr. Stone?" "Yeah?" "Are you going to be our new papa?" Martha's heart clenched. She opened her mouth to answer, but Elijah spoke first. "I'm going to be your mama's husband. What that makes me to you, that's up to you to decide." Tommy considered this. "My friend Billy had a stepfather. He was mean." "I'm not going to be mean." "Promise?" Elijah glanced back at the boy. "Promise." Tommy nodded, apparently satisfied. He settled back against the hay and closed his eyes. Samuel, predictably, was not satisfied. "You can promise all you want," he said, his voice low and hard. "Doesn't mean anything." "You're right." Elijah kept his eyes on the road. "Words don't mean much. Actions do. So watch my actions, Samuel. Judge me by what I do, not what I say. That's fair, isn't it?" Samuel didn't answer, but some of the tension went out of his shoulders. Grace, as always, said nothing. But when Martha looked back at her, she found her daughter watching Elijah with those big, empty eyes, watching him like she was trying to figure out what kind of creature he was. The town of Silver Creek was bigger than Martha had expected. Wooden buildings lined a main street churned to mud by horses and wagons, and people moved between them with the hurried purpose of folks trying to stay warm. Martha pulled her shawl up over her hair, suddenly aware of how visible they were. "Ezra's men could be here," she whispered to Elijah. "They could be anywhere. That's why we're not staying long." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a small church at the end of the street. "Wait here. I'll find the Reverend." He climbed down and disappeared inside. Martha sat rigid on the bench, her eyes scanning the street for any sign of danger. "Mama?" Tommy's voice came from the back. "I have to use the privy." "Hold it." "But Mama—" "I said hold it." The church door opened and Elijah emerged, followed by a thin man in black clothes. Reverend Crane was older than Martha had expected, with white hair and kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he walked. "Mrs. Wheeler." The Reverend stopped beside the wagon and looked up at her. "Elijah tells me you're in need of my services." "Yes, sir." "And this marriage, it's of your own free will? No one's forcing you?" Martha glanced at Elijah. "No one's forcing me." "Then let's get you inside where it's warm." The Reverend smiled gently. "God's house welcomes all who seek refuge." The ceremony was brief. They stood before the small altar, Martha and Elijah side by side, with the children seated in the front pew. Reverend Crane read from a worn Bible, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "Do you, Elijah Stone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." "And do you, Martha Wheeler, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Martha looked at Elijah, at this stranger who had bought her and her children for $12 and offered them everything without asking for anything in return. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The Reverend closed his Bible. "You may kiss your bride." Elijah turned to her. For a moment, Martha thought he would skip this part, that he would honor his promise not to touch her even in this small ceremonial way. But instead, he leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead. Soft, gentle, a promise rather than a claim. "It's done," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Martha's eyes burned. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Behind them, Tommy started clapping. Uncertain, but eager, Samuel sat stone-faced, and Grace, Grace was looking at Martha with something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, something that might have been understanding. The Reverend produced papers for them to sign. Martha wrote her name with a shaking hand. Martha Stone now, not Martha Wheeler, and watched Elijah sign beside her. The Reverend added his signature as witness, and it was done. Legal, binding, real. "I'll file these with the county clerk this afternoon," Reverend Crane said. "By tomorrow, it'll be official record. Anyone who questions the validity of this marriage will have to answer to God and the law both." "Thank you, Reverend." Elijah shook the old man's hand. "I won't forget this. Don't thank me. Just take care of her." Crane looked at Martha with those kind eyes. Take care of all of them. They were loading back into the wagon when it happened. A man stepped out of the general store across the street and stopped dead. He was big, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from rock. His eyes locked onto Martha, and his lips curved into a smile that made her blood run cold. "Well, well," his voice carried across the muddy street. "Mrs. Wheeler, fancy seeing you here." Martha's heart stopped. "Who is that?" Elijah's voice was low, dangerous. "One of Ezra's men, his foreman. Name's Garrett." Elijah stepped in front of her, putting his body between her and the man across the street. "Get in the wagon. Keep the children down." "Elijah!" "Now, Martha." She climbed up, pushing Tommy and Grace flat in the wagon bed. Samuel started to rise, his face fierce, but Martha grabbed his arm. "Stay down. Don't move. Don't speak." Garrett was crossing the street now, his smile widening with every step. 2 more men had emerged from the store behind him, following like shadows. "Mr. Wheeler's been real worried about you." Garrett stopped 10 feet from the wagon. 3 months, Mrs. Wheeler. 3 months he's been looking. And here you are, big as life, right in his own town. "Mrs. Stone." Elijah's voice was flat. Garrett's smile faltered. "What?" "Her name is Mrs. Stone now. We were married 10 minutes ago." Something ugly flickered across Garrett's face. "That's a lie." "Ask Reverend Crane. He performed the ceremony. It's legal, witnessed, and filed." Elijah took a step forward. "Which means you have no business with my wife." "Your wife." Garrett spat the words like they were poison. "Mr. Wheeler ain't gonna like this." "Mr. Wheeler can go to hell." Garrett's hand moved toward his gun. Elijah moved faster. In one smooth motion, he drew his pistol and had it leveled at Garrett's chest. The 2 men behind Garrett went for their weapons, but they were too slow. Elijah's other hand had already produced a second gun, covering all 3 of them. "You want to die today?" Elijah's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Because I'm real good at helping people die. Ask around. They'll tell you stories." Garrett's face had gone pale. His hand hovered over his gun, not quite touching. "You're making a mistake, mister." "Maybe, but it won't be my last one." Elijah cocked both pistols. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and walk away. You're going to tell Ezra Wheeler that his brother's widow is married now, and she's under my protection. And if he wants to dispute that, he can come find me himself. But if any of you so much as looks at my family again, I'll put you in the ground. All 3 of you. Right here, right now." The street had gone silent. People had stopped to watch, pressed against buildings, peering out of windows. No one moved. Garrett's eyes flickered to the church, where Reverend Crane stood in the doorway, watching. "This ain't over," Garrett said. "No," Elijah agreed. "It's not. But today is. Walk away, Garrett, while you still can." For a long, terrible moment, Martha thought Garrett would draw anyway, thought he would choose death over backing down. Then he turned and walked away. His men followed. Elijah didn't lower his guns until they disappeared around a corner. Jesus Christ! The words came out of Martha's mouth before she could stop them. Elijah holstered his weapons and climbed onto the wagon bench. His hands were steady, his face calm, like he hadn't just threatened to kill 3 men in the middle of a crowded street. "Let's go," he said, before they changed their minds. The ride back was tense and silent. Martha kept checking the road behind them, expecting pursuit, expecting gunfire, expecting something. But the miles passed without incident, and by the time the cabin came into view, her heart had finally started to slow. Elijah pulled the wagon to a stop and sat there for a moment, his hands still on the reins. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For scaring you. For scaring the children." He finally looked at her. "That man, Garrett, he wouldn't have backed down for words. He only understands one thing, and I gave it to him. But I know that's not what you signed up for." Martha studied his face. The hard lines, the old scars, the weariness that seemed to go bone deep. "What I signed up for," she said slowly, "was a man who would protect my family. You did that. I threatened to kill 3 people. You didn't kill them. You gave them a choice. They chose to walk away." She reached out and touched his arm. "Elijah, I grew up in hard country. I know what men like Garrett are. I know what it takes to make them back down. You did what you had to do." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Catherine hated it when I did things like that." "I'm not Catherine." He looked at her then, really looked, and Martha saw something shift in his eyes, something that might have been hope, or might have been fear, or might have been both. "No," he said softly, "you're not." That night, after the children were in bed, Martha found Elijah in the barn. He was brushing Bessie, long, slow strokes that seemed more for his benefit than the horse's. The lantern light caught the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that never quite went away. "You're going to wear her coat off," Martha said from the doorway. Elijah didn't turn around. "She doesn't mind." Martha walked closer, her boots crunching on the hay-strewn floor. She stopped beside him and ran her own hand along Bessie's flank. The mare's coat was warm, smooth, alive. "Samuel talked to me after dinner," Martha said. "Yeah?" "He said he's willing to give you a chance." She paused. "He said anyone who could make Garrett back down like that must be worth something." Elijah's hand stilled on the brush. "That's not exactly a ringing endorsement." "From Samuel, it might as well be a declaration of undying loyalty." Martha smiled slightly. "He's been carrying the weight of this family for 4 months. He doesn't trust easily. The fact that he's willing to try, that means something." "And Tommy?" "Tommy asked if you could teach him to shoot." Elijah let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Kid's 7. He's a boy who watched his mother get sold at auction. He wants to be able to protect her." Martha's voice softened. "You understand that, don't you?" "Yeah." Elijah set down the brush. "I understand that." "And Grace doesn't trust me. I know." "Actually," Martha hesitated, "when we got back today, she brought her leather scrap to show me. She'd been working on it while we were gone, poking holes in it with a stick, trying to sew it like you showed her." Elijah turned to look at her. "She was working on it?" "Not well, but she was trying." Martha's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "That's the first time she's tried to do anything in 6 weeks, Elijah. The first time she's shown any interest in anything. And it's because of you." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My daughter Lily loved horses. She used to come out to the barn with me every morning, help me feed them, brush them. She said horses understood her better than people did. His voice cracked slightly. I think maybe Grace is the same. Maybe she is. I could teach her how to care for them, how to ride when she's bigger. Martha's throat tightened. I'd like that. They stood in silence, the only sounds the horses breathing and the wind outside. I meant what I said before, Elijah said finally, about not touching you, not expecting anything. This marriage is what it needs to be, Martha cut him off. For now. But Elijah, she reached out and took his hand. We're bound together now, for better or worse. Maybe we should at least try to know each other. What do you mean? I mean, you could tell me about Catherine, about Emma and Lily, about who you were before all this. She squeezed his hand. And I could tell you about William, about my life before Ezra started hunting us, about who I am when I'm not running scared. Elijah looked at their joined hands. You want to know about me? I want to know my husband. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. All right, Elijah said slowly. Where do you want me to start? Start with Catherine. Tell me how you met her. So he did. He told her about the school teacher with the wild temper and the brown hair and the complete lack of fear, about how he'd shown up at her door covered in blood, and she told him to come back when he was civilized. About the 3 months he'd spent trying to become the kind of man she might not be ashamed of. Martha listened, and when he was done, she told him about William. About the dance where they'd met, the year he'd courted her, the early days of their marriage when they'd had nothing but love and hope. They talked until the lantern burned low, until Bessie stamped her hoof, impatient for them to leave, until the cold crept in and they had no choice but to go back to the cabin. But something had changed. They weren't strangers anymore. They were partners, allies, two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their lives and decided to build something new. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was a start. The next morning, Grace spoke. Martha was making breakfast, Elijah was feeding the horses, and the boys were arguing about whose turn it was to gather eggs. Grace sat by the window, staring out at the snow like she did every morning. And then she said, clear as a bell, "Mama!" Martha dropped the spoon she was holding. It clattered against the floor. "Grace?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "Baby, did you just—" "Mama!" Grace turned from the window. Her eyes were focused, present, alive in a way they hadn't been in weeks. "The snow is pretty." Martha's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face, and opened her arms. Grace came to her. Martha held her daughter tight, rocking back and forth, sobbing with a relief so profound it felt like pain. The boys had gone silent, staring. They'd never seen their mother cry like this. The door opened and Elijah came in, stamping snow off his boots. He stopped when he saw Martha on the floor with Grace in her arms. "What happened? Is she hurt?" "She talked." Martha looked up at him, tears and joy and grief all tangled together on her face. "Elijah, she talked." Elijah's expression shifted. He crossed the room and crouched down beside them, his eyes fixed on Grace's face. "Hey there, little one." His voice was gentle. "Did you say something?" Grace looked at him, and then, slowly, she smiled. It was a small smile, fragile, like a flower opening after a long winter. But it was a smile. "Pretty," Grace said, pointing at the window. "The snow is pretty." Elijah's throat worked. He reached out and touched Grace's cheek, so gentle, so careful. "Yeah," he said roughly. "Yeah, it is." Martha watched them, this man who had lost his daughters and this girl who had lost her father, and felt something in her chest crack open and begin to heal. They were going to be okay. All of them. She didn't know what was coming, didn't know when Ezra would arrive, or what he would do, or how they would survive it. But for the first time in months, Martha believed they would survive. Together. The days that followed were the closest thing to peace Martha had known since William died. Elijah taught Samuel to care for the horses, patiently explaining each task until the boy could do it himself. Tommy followed Elijah everywhere, a shadow full of questions that never seemed to end. And Grace was slowly, carefully, coming back to life. She didn't speak much. A few words here and there, always soft, always hesitant. But she was present now, watching, listening, engaging in ways she hadn't for weeks. She started helping Martha with small tasks, stirring the porridge, folding blankets, setting the table for meals. And every evening, she sat with Elijah while he worked on his leather projects, her small hands busy with the scrap he'd given her. "She's healing," Martha said one night, watching them from across the room. Elijah glanced up. "She's strong, like her mother." "I'm not strong." "You're the strongest person I know." He went back to his work. "You've kept 4 lives going through 3 months of hell. That takes more strength than anything I've ever done." Martha didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But later, when the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, she found herself standing in Elijah's doorway. He looked up from the book he was reading. "Something wrong?" "No," Martha hesitated. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For Grace, for Samuel, for Tommy." She took a breath. "For giving us a chance to be a family again." Elijah set down his book. "You don't have to thank me for that." "Yes, I do, because you didn't have to do any of it. You could have left us on that auction block. You could have turned us away when we showed up on your doorstep. You could have—" "Martha." He stood up and crossed to her. "Stop." She stopped. "I didn't do any of this to be thanked. I did it because it was right. Because you needed help, and I could give it. That's all." "That's not all," Martha met his eyes. "You did it because you're a good man, a decent man. Whatever you did before, whoever you used to be, that's who you are now." Elijah's expression flickered. For a moment he looked almost vulnerable. "I'm not a good man," he said quietly. "I've done things you can't imagine. Things that would make you sick if you knew." "Then tell me." "What?" "Tell me." Martha stepped closer. "Tell me the worst thing you've ever done, and then let me decide whether it changes anything." Elijah stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away. "There was a man," he said slowly, "in Arizona. I was hunting him for a bounty. He'd killed 3 people, including a child. I tracked him for 2 weeks through the desert. When I finally caught him, he begged for mercy. Said he had a family. Said he'd changed." Martha waited. "I killed him anyway. Shot him in the back while he was running." Elijah's voice was flat. "Afterward, I found out he'd been telling the truth. He did have a family, a wife and 2 boys. I'd made them orphans, just like the man he'd killed had made someone else orphans." "Elijah." "That's who I am, Martha. That's what I'm capable of. I killed a man who was running away, who was begging for his life, and I didn't feel anything. Not then, not for years afterward." He finally turned to face her. "So don't call me a good man. Don't pretend I'm something I'm not." Martha looked at him, this man with blood on his hands and pain in his eyes, and a heart that was somehow still capable of tenderness. "You felt something eventually," she said quietly, "or you wouldn't be telling me this." Elijah's jaw clenched. "I felt it when my daughters died, when I held Lily in my arms and watched her stop breathing. I felt it then, and I felt it every day since. That's what guilt is, Elijah. That's what redemption looks like. You did a terrible thing, and you've been carrying it ever since. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you human." "It makes me a killer." "Maybe." Martha reached out and took his hand. "But it also makes you someone who understands what it costs to hurt people. Someone who knows the weight of it. And that's why I trust you with my children. Because you know what it means to take a life, and you choose not to." Elijah looked at their joined hands. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Catherine used to say something like that. She said the men who were most dangerous were the ones who didn't understand what they were capable of. That knowing made you careful, made you choose." "She sounds wise." "She was the best person I ever knew." His fingers tightened around hers. "Until now." Martha's breath caught. "Elijah." "I'm not trying to replace her. I'm not trying to make you into something you're not. But Martha." He looked up at her, and his eyes were burning. "You make me want to be better. You and your children. You make me want to try." "Then try." Martha stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Try with me. That's all I'm asking." Elijah lifted his hand and touched her face. His palm was rough against her cheek, but his touch was gentle. "I'll try," he said. "I promise." And outside, in the darkness, the snow kept falling. 2 weeks passed like a held breath. Martha fell into the rhythm of the ranch, waking before dawn to start the fire, cooking meals that stretched their supplies as far as they could go, mending clothes and watching her children slowly come back to life. The cabin that had felt so foreign that first night now felt like home, and she caught herself thinking of it that way more often than she wanted to admit. Elijah worked from sunup to sundown, chopping wood, tending the animals, reinforcing the cabin against the deepening winter. He'd grown quieter since their conversation that night, not distant exactly, but thoughtful. Martha would catch him watching her sometimes, and when their eyes met, something passed between them that neither of them had words for yet. The children were thriving. Samuel had lost some of his brittle anger, replaced by a cautious respect that showed in the way he followed Elijah's instructions without argument. Tommy had attached himself completely, trailing after Elijah like a duckling, chattering about everything and nothing, while Elijah listened with patient attention. And Grace. Grace was speaking more every day. Short sentences mostly, observations about the world around her, but each word felt like a miracle. She'd started calling Elijah by name, and the first time she'd said it, Martha had seen something break open in his face. Something that had been closed for 4 years. They were becoming a family. Against all odds, against all reason, they were knitting themselves together into something real. Martha should have known it couldn't last. The rider came on a Tuesday morning. Elijah saw him first, a dark shape moving across the white landscape, and he was on his feet with his rifle before Martha could react. "Inside." His voice was flat, commanding. "Take the children to the bedroom." "Elijah, now, Martha." She gathered the children and went, her heart pounding. Through the bedroom door, she heard Elijah step onto the porch, heard the creak of the boards under his boots, heard his voice carry across the yard. "That's far enough." The rider stopped. Martha couldn't see him from where she stood, but she could hear his voice, smooth and cultured and utterly wrong in this wild place. "Mr. Stone, I presume. My name is Ezra Wheeler. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Martha's blood turned to ice. I don't have anything that belongs to you." Elijah's voice was steady. "And if you've come looking for trouble, you've found it. I'm not looking for trouble." Ezra's voice was pleasant, reasonable, the voice of a man discussing business over dinner. "I'm looking for my brother's widow and her children. I have legal documents establishing my guardianship. I have the support of the territorial marshal, and I have every right to collect what's mine. She's not yours. She was my brother's. That makes her my responsibility." "She's my wife!" The words cracked like a whip. "We were married 2 weeks ago. Reverend Crane performed the ceremony. The papers have been filed with the county clerk. Whatever claim you think you have, it's gone." Silence. Long silence. When Ezra spoke again, his voice had lost its pleasant edge. "You married her." "I did." "After knowing her for what? A week? 2 weeks?" A laugh, cold and sharp. "Mr. Stone, I'm a reasonable man. I understand desperation. You saw a pretty woman in a bad situation and you thought you could save her. Very noble. But this marriage is a sham, and we both know it. Let me take what's mine, and I'll forget this ever happened. Nothing here is yours. The children are my blood. The children are my stepchildren now, legally, binding." Another silence. Martha pressed her ear harder against the door, straining to hear. "You're making a mistake." Ezra's voice had gone soft, dangerous. "I came here alone as a gesture of good faith. But I have men, Mr. Stone, many men, and the law on my side. The law says she's my wife. The law says those children are under my protection. If you want to dispute that, take it to a judge. But if you set foot on my property again, I'll put a bullet in your chest and let God sort out who is right. You're threatening me." "I'm promising you." Hoofbeats, moving away. Martha sagged against the wall, her knees weak with relief. But when Elijah came back inside, his face told her the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. "He'll be back," Elijah said that night, after the children were asleep. "A man like that doesn't back down. He'll find another way." Martha sat across from him at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "What kind of way?" "Legal, maybe. He'll try to prove the marriage is fraudulent, that you were coerced. Or he'll claim I'm unfit, my history as a bounty hunter, the things I've done. A good lawyer could make me look like a monster." "You're not a monster." "Courts don't care what I am. They care what can be proven." Elijah rubbed his eyes. "Or he might skip the legal route entirely. Come back with enough men to take what he wants and deal with the consequences later." "Would he do that?" "You know him better than I do. Would he?" Martha thought about Ezra, about the way he'd looked at her at William's funeral, like she was a prize he'd finally won. About the things he'd said when he came to collect her, the promises and threats, all wrapped up in that smooth, reasonable voice. About the way his hand had felt when he grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Yes," she said quietly, "he would." Elijah nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Then we prepare." "How?" "I teach Samuel to shoot, properly, not just holding a gun." He held up a hand when Martha started to protest. "He's 10 years old, and there's a man coming who might try to take his family. He deserves to be able to fight back." "He's a child." "I was younger than him when I learned." Elijah's voice was flat. "And I survived because of it." Martha wanted to argue. Every instinct she had screamed against putting a weapon in her son's hands, against turning him into something hard and dangerous before he'd had a chance to be soft. But she thought about Garrett in the street, his hand moving toward his gun. She thought about Ezra's voice, so pleasant, and so wrong. She thought about what would happen to her children if something happened to her and Elijah both. "All right," she said. "Teach him." The lessons started the next day. Martha watched from the porch as Elijah showed Samuel how to hold a rifle, how to sight along the barrel, how to breathe before pulling the trigger. Samuel was a quick learner, his young face fierce with concentration. And by the end of the first hour, he could hit the target more often than not. "Good," Elijah said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're a natural." Samuel looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, there was something like admiration in his eyes. "Can we do it again tomorrow?" "Every day until you don't miss." Tommy wanted to learn too, of course, but Elijah was firm. "When you're older." "But Samuel gets to—" "Samuel's bigger. He can handle the kick. You try to shoot this thing and it'll knock you flat." Elijah crouched down so he was eye level with the boy. "But I'll tell you what. You can help me clean the guns afterward. That's just as important." Tommy's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. A weapon that isn't clean is a weapon that might not fire when you need it. That's something every man should know." Martha watched them together, Tommy chattering excitedly, Elijah patient and steady, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. This man who had been alone for 4 years, who had forgotten how to be gentle, was learning again. Her children were teaching him, and he was teaching them too. Grace came to stand beside Martha, her small hand finding Martha's larger one. "Mama?" "Yes, baby." "Is the bad man going to come back?" The boy was already moving, his rifle in his hands. He had taken to sleeping with it beside him, and Martha had stopped arguing about it. "What's happening?" Tommy's voice was thick with sleep and fear. "I don't know. Stay close to me." They stumbled into the main room to find Elijah already at the door, his rifle raised. "The barn's on fire." His voice was tight. "Stay inside. Don't come out, no matter what you hear." "Elijah, promise me, Martha." She grabbed his arm. "Come back to me." Something flickered in his eyes. He cupped her face with one rough hand and pressed his forehead to hers, just for a moment. "Always," he said. Then he was gone, out the door, into the orange light and the smoke. Martha gathered the children around her and waited. The sounds that came through the walls were terrible. Horses screaming, men shouting, gunfire sharp and sudden. Tommy was crying. Grace had gone silent again, her face blank and empty, like it had been those first terrible weeks. Samuel stood by the window with his rifle, his jaw clenched so tight Martha could see the muscles jumping. "I should be out there," he said. "You should be right here, protecting your brother and sister. Elijah needs help. Elijah needs to know we're safe." Martha grabbed his shoulder and turned him to face her. "That's how you help him, Samuel. You keep us safe so he doesn't have to worry." Samuel stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and took up position by the door, his rifle ready. The gunfire stopped. The silence was worse. Martha counted her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20. The door opened. Elijah stumbled through, covered in soot and blood. He was holding his left arm against his chest, and red was seeping through his fingers. "You're hurt." Martha was at his side in an instant, pushing him toward a chair. "It's nothing, just a graze." "You're bleeding everywhere." "The barn's gone. They set it on fire while I was inside. I got the horses out, but—" He winced as Martha pulled his hand away from the wound. "This isn't going to stop, is it?" she said quietly. "No." "What do we do?" Elijah was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy. "We have 2 choices. We can run, pack up tonight, head north, try to disappear before they can find us again. Or we can stay and fight." "What happens if we run?" We spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Ezra has money and connections. He'll keep looking. Maybe he finds us in a month, maybe a year, maybe never. But we'll never know. We'll never be able to stop rumming. And if we stay? Then we end this, one way or another. Martha looked at her children, at Samuel, standing guard with his rifle, too young to be a soldier, but becoming one anyway. At Tommy, curled in the corner with his thumb in his mouth, trying to make himself small. At Grace, silent again, staring at nothing. They'd been running for 3 months. 3 months of fear and cold and hunger. 3 months of never feeling safe, never sleeping through the night, never knowing what tomorrow would bring. She couldn't do that to them again. Couldn't watch them slowly break apart under the weight of constant terror. "We stay," Martha said. "We fight." Elijah nodded slowly. "Then we need help. I have a few people who owe me favors. Men I knew from my bounty hunting days. If I can get word to them..." "How long will that take?" "A few days, maybe a week." "Do we have that long?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but it's our best chance." The next morning, Elijah rode out before dawn. "I'll be back in 3 days," he told Martha, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes boring into hers. "4 at the most. You keep the children inside. Keep the rifle close. Anyone comes near this cabin, you shoot first and ask questions later." "I will." "Samuel knows what to do. He'll protect you if he has to." "I know." Elijah hesitated. Something passed across his face, something vulnerable and raw. "Martha, I know." She reached up and touched his face. "I know, Elijah. Come back to me." He pulled her close and held her tight, his arms strong around her, his heart beating steady against her cheek. It was the first time he'd really held her, and Martha felt something inside her crack open and spill out. "I will," he said against her hair. "I promise." Then he was gone, riding into the gray dawn, and Martha was alone with her children and her fear. The first day passed without incident. Martha kept the children busy with chores, with lessons, with anything that would keep their minds occupied. Samuel took his guard duty seriously, patrolling the cabin with his rifle, checking the windows, watching the road. Tommy asked 100 questions about where Elijah had gone and when he was coming back. Martha answered as honestly as she could, which meant saying, "I don't know," more often than she wanted to. Grace was quiet again, not silent like before, but subdued. She spent hours by the window, watching the snow, her leather scrap clutched in her hands. "What are you looking for, baby?" Martha asked her. "Papa," Grace said softly. "I'm looking for Papa." Martha's heart broke a little more. "Elijah will be back soon," she said, pulling Grace into her lap. "He promised." "Not Elijah." Grace looked up at her with those big eyes. "My other Papa. The one who went away." Martha held her daughter close and didn't have words for the grief that swelled up inside her. William. Grace was still looking for William. "He's not coming back, sweetheart," Martha whispered. "You know that, right? Papa William is gone. He's in heaven now." "I know." Grace's voice was small. "But sometimes I pretend he's coming, so I'm not so scared." Martha rocked her, tears streaming down her face, and wished she could pretend too. The second day brought visitors. Martha saw them coming from a distance. 2 riders, moving slow and careful, their hands visible. Not attacking, not threatening, just coming. "Samuel," she said quietly, "get your brother and sister to the bedroom. Lock the door." "Mama!" "Do it now." Samuel obeyed, and Martha took. Agnes Fairfax was a woman in her 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, sitting her horse like she'd been born in the saddle. Reverend Crane looked even frailer than he had at the wedding, but his eyes were kind. "May we come inside?" Agnes asked. "It's cold, and what we have to say shouldn't be said on a doorstep." Martha led them into the cabin, keeping the rifle close. Agnes looked around at the small space, at the burned smell still lingering from the barn fire, at the children peering out from the bedroom door. "So it's true," she said quietly. "Ezra Wheeler tried to burn you out." "How do you know about that?" "Everyone in town knows. Garrett was bragging about it at the saloon." Agnes's voice hardened. "That man has been a blight on Silver Creek for years. He owns half the town and thinks he owns the rest. Most folks are too scared to stand against him." "But not you?" "I'm too old and too mean to be scared of men like Ezra Wheeler." Agnes sat down at the table uninvited. "I knew your husband, William Wheeler. He used to come into my store for supplies. Good man, honest, worked himself half to death trying to provide for his family." Martha's throat tightened. "You knew William?" "I knew him, and I knew he was nothing like his brother." Agnes leaned forward. "Mrs. Stone, there are people in town who don't like what Ezra's doing, who think a woman has a right to choose her own life. We've been quiet because quiet was safer. But what happened to your barn, that's not something we can ignore." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're not alone." Agnes reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. "This is a petition, signed by 23 citizens of Silver Creek, calling for the territorial marshal to investigate Ezra Wheeler's actions. Harassment, destruction of property, abuse of power. It's not much, but it's a start." Martha took the paper with trembling hands. 23 names. 23 people willing to stand against Ezra.
"Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for us?"
Reverend Crane spoke for the first time. "Because it's right, my dear. Because God calls us to protect the innocent and stand against injustice. Because," he smiled gently, "because your husband Elijah came to see me before he left. He asked me to watch over you. I told him I would do more than watch." Martha felt tears burn behind her eyes. Elijah. Even while he was gone, he was still protecting her. "There's more," Agnes said. "Ezra's pushing too hard, too fast. He's made enemies even among his own men. Garrett's loyal, but some of the others are having second thoughts. If we can show them that the town won't support Ezra's vendetta, they might back down. They might." Agnes's eyes were sharp. "It's not a guarantee, but it's leverage. And right now, leverage is what you need." Martha looked at the petition in her hands, at the names of people she'd never met who were willing to risk Ezra's anger for her.
"Thank you," she said, her voice rough. "I don't know how to—"
"Don't thank me yet." Agnes stood up. "Ezra's not going to take this lying down. When he finds out what we've done, he'll be furious. Things might get worse before they get better."
"They're already worse."
"They can always get worse, Mrs. Stone. Remember that." After Agnes and the Reverend left, Martha sat at the table and stared at the petition until the words blurred. 23 people. 23 strangers willing to fight for her. It wasn't enough to stop Ezra, she knew that. But it was something. It was proof that she wasn't alone, that the world wasn't entirely made up of wolves.
"Mama?"
Samuel appeared in the doorway. "Who were those people?"
"Friends."
The word felt strange in her mouth.
"They came to help us."
"Help us how?" Martha folded the petition and tucked it into her dress.
"I'll tell you later. Right now, I need you to keep watching. Elijah should be back soon."
"What if he's not?" Martha looked at her son, at his fierce young face, at the fear he was trying so hard to hide.
Then we do what we've always done, she said. We survive. Together.
Samuel nodded and went back to his post. Martha sat in the empty cabin and waited for her husband to come home. The third day dawned cold and gray. Martha woke with a start, her heart pounding, certain something was wrong. She lay still in the darkness, listening, but there was nothing. Just the wind. Just the silence. She got up and went to the window. The world outside was white and still. Snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in a fresh blanket that sparkled in the early light. It was beautiful, peaceful, completely at odds with the fear coiling in her gut. Elijah should be back today. He'd said 3 days, maybe 4. But what if something had happened? What if Ezra had found him on the road? What if he was lying somewhere in the snow, bleeding, dying, already dead? "Stop it," Martha whispered to herself. "Stop it. He's coming back. He promised." She made breakfast, woke the children, went through the motions of a normal day while every nerve in her body screamed with tension. Samuel watched her with knowing eyes. He didn't say anything, but he kept his rifle closer than usual. Tommy chattered about the snow, about wanting to build a fort, about when Elijah was going to come back and teach him to ride. Martha answered on autopilot, her attention split between her son and the window. Grace sat by the fire with her leather scrap, quiet and watchful. The hours crawled by. Noon came and went. Afternoon stretched into evening. The sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and red. No Elijah. Martha stood at the window, her forehead pressed against the cold glass, and felt hope begin to crack. "Mama?" Grace's small voice came from behind her. "Is something wrong?" Martha turned. Her daughter stood in the middle of the room, her leather scrap clutched to her chest, her eyes too big in her thin face. "No, baby. Everything's fine." "You're lying." The words hit Martha like a slap. She stared at her daughter, at this 5-year-old who had seen too much and learned too young that adults couldn't always be trusted. "Grace, Elijah's not coming back, is he?" Grace's voice was steady, too steady. "He's gone, like Papa, like everyone." "That's not true." Martha crossed the room and knelt in front of her daughter. "Elijah is coming back. He promised me. He promised." "Papa promised too. He said he'd always come home. And then he didn't." Martha's heart shattered. She pulled Grace into her arms and held her tight, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. This was what she'd done to her children. This was the legacy of loss and fear she'd given them. A world where promises meant nothing and everyone they loved went away. "I know, baby," she whispered. "I know Papa promised, and I know he wanted to come home more than anything. But sometimes bad things happen that we can't control. Sometimes people leave even when they don't want to. Is Elijah going to leave?" "No." Martha pulled back and looked into her daughter's eyes. "No, Grace. Elijah is not going to leave. He's going to come back, and he's going to be with us, and we're going to be a family. I believe that. I need you to believe it too." Grace stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay, Mama. I'll try." Martha hugged her again, and over Grace's shoulder she saw Samuel at the window, his body suddenly rigid. "Someone's coming," he said. Martha's blood ran cold. She set Grace down and moved to the window, her hand finding the rifle by instinct. A single rider coming fast from the south, too far away to identify. "Get your brother and sister to the bedroom," Martha said. "Mama, if it's Ezra—" "Then I'll deal with him. Go." Samuel hesitated for just a moment. Then he grabbed Tommy and Grace and hustled them toward the bedroom. Martha raised the rifle and waited. The rider came closer. Closer. And then she saw him. Dark hair, broad shoulders, a familiar way of sitting in the saddle. Elijah. Martha dropped the rifle and ran. She was off the porch and into the snow before she knew she was moving, running toward him through the cold, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Elijah saw her coming and swung down from his horse, and then she was in his arms, holding him so tight her muscles screamed. "You came back!" Her voice was muffled against his chest. "You came back!" "I told you I would." His arms tightened around her. "I always keep my promises." Martha pulled back and looked at him. He was exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, days of stubble on his jaw. But he was alive. He was here. "Did you find them?" she asked. "Your friends?" "I found them." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "They'll be here in 2 days. 6 men, all of them people I'd trust with my life. Ezra Wheeler has no idea what's coming for him." Martha laughed, a sound that was half sob, half relief. "Agnes Fairfax came while you were gone. She brought a petition. 23 people signed it, calling for the marshal to investigate Ezra." Elijah's eyebrows rose. "Agnes Fairfax? You know her?" "I know of her. She's been fighting men like Ezra for 30 years. His smile grew. "If she's on our side, we might actually have a chance." "Papa!" Tommy's voice rang out from the porch. "Papa's back!" Elijah turned toward the cabin, and Martha saw his face change when he heard the word. Papa. Tommy had never called him that before. "Go on," Martha said softly. "They need to see you." Elijah walked toward the porch, and Tommy launched himself into his arms. Samuel hung back, but he was smiling, and Grace came slowly down the steps and stood in front of Elijah, looking up at him with those big, serious eyes. "You came back," she said. "I did." "You kept your promise." "I always will." Elijah crouched down so he was eye level with her. "I'm not going anywhere, Grace. Not ever. This is my family now, and I protect my family." Grace studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his cheek with one small hand. "Okay," she said softly. "I believe you." And for the first time since her father died, she smiled. Elijah's men arrived 2 days later, just as he'd promised. Martha watched them ride in from the kitchen window, 6 figures on horseback cutting through the morning snow. They were hard-looking men, weathered by years of living on the edge of civilization, but they moved with the easy confidence of people who knew exactly what they were capable of. "Who are they?" Samuel asked, pressing close to the window beside her. "Friends," Elijah said from the doorway. "Old friends who owe me debts." He went out to meet them, and Martha watched through the glass as the men dismounted and gathered around him. There was backslapping, handshakes, the kind of rough affection that men show when they've survived hard things together. "Mama?" Tommy tugged at her sleeve. "Are those men going to help us fight the bad man?" "Yes, baby. That's exactly what they're going to do." Elijah brought them inside, one by one, to introduce them. There was Jack Hollister, a former cavalry scout with a missing ear and a grin that made him look younger than his gray hair suggested. Marcus Webb, a freed slave who'd made his way west after the war and never looked back. The Brennan brothers, Daniel and Patrick, twins who finished each other's sentences and moved like they shared one mind. Old Tom Reeves, who didn't talk much but watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. And finally, a Cherokee man called Joseph Running Bear, who nodded politely to Martha and immediately crouched down to Grace's level. "Hello, little one," he said, his voice soft. "You have old eyes, eyes that have seen too much." Grace stared at him without flinching.
You have sad eyes, too.
Joseph smiled, and something passed between them that Martha couldn't quite name.
Yes, I do. Maybe we can be sad together and make the sadness smaller.
Grace considered this. Then she nodded solemnly and went back to her spot by the fire.
She's special, Joseph said to Martha. Guard her well.
I intend to. The men made camp in what was left of the barn, bedding down in the hay with an ease that spoke of years sleeping rough. Elijah spent the afternoon with them, planning, discussing, preparing for what was coming. Martha kept the children busy inside, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, while the world outside grew more dangerous by the hour. That night, after the children were asleep, Elijah came to find her. "We need to talk." Martha set down the mending she'd been pretending to do.
About what?
About what happens tomorrow. Elijah sat down across from her, his face grave. Agnes Fairfax sent word. The territorial marshal is coming to investigate Ezra's conduct. He'll be here by noon.
That's good, isn't it?
It could be. Or it could make things worse. Elijah leaned forward. Ezra knows the marshal is coming. He knows about the petition, about the investigation. If he's going to make a move, it'll be before the marshal arrives. Tonight or early tomorrow morning. Martha's blood chilled.
You think he'll attack?
I think he's desperate.
He's spent months hunting you, spent money and resources and reputation on this obsession.
If the marshal rules against him, he loses everything. A man like Ezra doesn't accept losing.
So what do we do?
We wait. We watch. And if he comes, we're ready. Elijah reached out and took her hands. "Martha, I need to tell you something. In case—"
"Don't!"
Her voice was sharp.
"Don't you dare say goodbye to me."
"I'm not saying goodbye. I'm saying—" He stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily. "I'm saying that these past weeks have been the best of my life since Catherine died. You and the children, you've given me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. A family. A reason to wake up in the morning." Martha's eyes burned.
"Elijah."
"Let me finish." His grip tightened on her hands. "If something happens tomorrow, if Ezra's men get through, I need you to take the children and run. Jack knows a place in Wyoming, a ranch owned by a woman who helps people disappear. He'll take you there. I'm not leaving without you. You will if you have to. The children come first, always." Martha wanted to argue, wanted to scream that she wouldn't lose another husband, wouldn't let another man sacrifice himself for her. But she looked into Elijah's eyes and saw the truth there. He would die to protect them if he had to, and nothing she said would change that.
"Promise me you'll try to live," she said instead. "Promise me you'll fight to come back to us."
"I promise." She leaned forward and kissed him, not on the forehead like he'd kissed her at their wedding, but properly, fully, with all the fear and hope and desperate love she'd been holding back for weeks. Elijah froze for just a moment. Then his hands came up to cup her face, and he kissed her back with a hunger that stole her breath. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were trembling. "Well," Elijah said, his voice rough, "that was unexpected." Martha laughed, a sound that was half sob. "I've wanted to do that for days." "Why didn't you?"
"I didn't know if you wanted me to. You said this marriage was just for protection. You said you wouldn't touch me."
"I said I wouldn't touch you unless you wanted me to." Elijah's thumb traced along her cheekbone. "Do you want me to, Martha?"
"Yes."
The word came out as a whisper.
"Yes, I want you to."
Elijah pulled her close and held her, his heart beating steady against her ear. "Then whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together, as husband and wife. For real." For real, Martha agreed. And for one brief, precious moment, she let herself believe that everything was going to be all right. The attack came at dawn. Martha woke to the sound of gunfire, close and sharp in the early morning stillness. She was out of bed before she fully understood what was happening, her body moving on instinct, born of months of running. "Children, wake up! Now!" Samuel was already moving, grabbing his rifle, his young face set in grim lines. Tommy stumbled out of bed, confused and frightened, and Grace clung to Martha's nightgown with white-knuckled hands. "What's happening?" Tommy's voice was high with fear. "Bad men are coming." Martha pushed them toward the back of the cabin. "We need to hide. Samuel, help me move the trunk." Together, they dragged the heavy trunk away from the wall, revealing a trapdoor that Elijah had shown her days ago. A root cellar, he'd said, but also an escape route if they needed one. "Get in," Martha ordered. "All of you." "I should stay and fight." Samuel's jaw was set. Elijah taught you to protect your family. That's what you're doing." Martha grabbed his shoulders. "Get in that cellar. Keep your brother and sister safe. If anyone comes through that trapdoor who isn't me or Elijah, you shoot them. Understand?" Samuel's eyes widened. Then he nodded. Martha helped them down into the darkness, then closed the trapdoor and dragged the trunk back over it. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. She grabbed the rifle Elijah had left for her and moved to the window. Outside, chaos reigned. Elijah's men had taken positions around the property, returning fire from behind cover. Martha could see muzzle flashes in the gray dawn, could hear shouts and screams and the terrible thunder of guns. And there, at the head of a group of riders, was Ezra Wheeler. He sat his horse like a king surveying his kingdom, untouched by the violence around him, his face calm and certain. He was close enough that Martha could see his expression, and what she saw made her blood run cold. He was smiling. The front door burst open, and Elijah stumbled through, blood running from a cut on his forehead. "Martha, get down!" "The children are in the cellar." "Good. Stay away from the windows." He pressed his back against the wall, reloading his pistol with practiced speed. "They've got us outnumbered. Ezra brought at least 15 men. Can we hold them off?" "We're trying." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Jack's down. Marcus is holding the south side, but I don't know for how long." "What do we do?" "We fight. We survive." He met her eyes. "And we wait for the marshal. He won't be here for hours. Then we hold for hours." A bullet shattered the window above Martha's head, showering her with glass. She ducked, heart pounding, and felt Elijah's hand on her arm. "Stay low. Don't shoot unless you have to. We need to conserve ammunition." He was gone before she could respond, back out into the chaos, and Martha was left alone with her rifle and her fear. The next hour was the longest of her life. She listened to the battle rage outside, flinching at every gunshot, praying with every breath that Elijah was still alive. She moved from window to window, watching for anyone who might try to breach the cabin, her finger resting on the trigger of her rifle. Twice she saw men approaching. Twice she raised her weapon and prepared to fire. Both times they were cut down by Elijah's allies before they reached the porch. And then, suddenly, the gunfire stopped. Martha held her breath, listening. Nothing. Just the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a horse's nervous whinny. The door opened. Martha spun, rifle raised, and found herself staring at Ezra Wheeler. He stood in the doorway, immaculate despite the battle, his hands empty and raised. Behind him, she could see Elijah on his knees in the snow, his hands bound, blood streaming down his face. Two of Ezra's men held him in place. "Mrs. Wheeler," Ezra said pleasantly. "Or should I say, Mrs. Stone? Please, put the gun down. There's no need for further violence.
Where are the others?
Your husband's friends? Dead or captured. It's over, Martha. There's nowhere left to run. He stepped into the cabin, still smiling that terrible smile. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way, you put down the gun and come with me quietly. The hard way, he glanced back at Elijah. Well, the hard way involves me putting a bullet in your new husband's head while you watch. Your choice. Martha's hands were shaking. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Elijah's voice cut through the panic. Don't do it, Martha. Don't you dare give in to him. Shut up. One of Ezra's men struck Elijah across the face. Shut your mouth. Martha, listen to me. Elijah's voice was urgent despite the blood. He's going to kill me anyway. He's going to kill all of us. Don't let him. Another blow. Elijah sagged in his captor's grip. That's enough. Ezra's voice was mild. Martha, dear, I'm running out of patience. Put the gun down. Martha looked at Elijah, at his battered face, at the desperate plea in his eyes. He was telling her to run, telling her to save herself and the children, even if it meant watching him die. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't lose another husband, couldn't let her children become orphans again. She lowered the rifle. Good girl. Ezra moved toward her, his smile widening. I knew you'd see reason eventually. You always were smarter than William gave you credit for. He reached out to touch her face. And that's when the shot rang out. Ezra stumbled, his hand going to his shoulder, where a red stain was spreading across his fine coat. He spun toward the source of the shot, his face contorted with shock and rage. Samuel stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his rifle raised, his young face pale but determined. You stay away from my mother. For one frozen moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Elijah threw himself backward, knocking his captors off balance. Martha dove for her rifle. Ezra's men shouted, scrambling for their weapons, and Samuel fired again. The second shot went wide, but it was enough to create confusion. Elijah broke free of his captors, his bound hands no longer a hindrance, as he used his body like a weapon. Martha raised her rifle and fired at the man closest to Ezra, saw him fall. The children! Elijah shouted. Get them out! Martha ran for the bedroom, grabbing Samuel's arm. The cellar, now! But now, Samuel! She yanked him toward the trapdoor, throwing aside the trunk, hauling up Tommy and Grace from the darkness below. Grace was crying silently, and Tommy looked like he might be sick. But they were alive. They were still alive. Back door, Martha ordered. Go, go, go! They ran. Behind them, the sounds of fighting continued. Gunfire, shouting, the terrible thud of bodies hitting the ground. Martha didn't look back. She couldn't look back. She just held Grace in her arms and ran. Tommy's hand gripped tight in hers, Samuel bringing up the rear with his rifle still clutched like a lifeline. They made it to the tree line before anyone came after them. Mama! Tommy's voice was shrill. Someone's coming! Martha spun, raising her rifle, ready to shoot whatever threat was bearing down on them. It was Joseph Running Bear. This way, he said, his voice calm despite the blood on his shirt. I know a place. They followed him through the trees, stumbling through snow that came up to the children's knees. Martha could hear pursuit behind them, shouts, hoofbeats, men crashing through the underbrush. Here, Joseph stopped at a rocky outcropping, a narrow gap barely visible beneath an overhang of stone. Inside, quickly. The children squeezed through. Martha followed, pulling Joseph after her. They pressed themselves against the cold stone, barely breathing as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Men on horseback passed within feet of their hiding place. So close, Martha could hear their breathing. She can't have gone far, someone said. Find her! The hoofbeats moved away. The voices faded. And still they waited. Minutes passed. An hour. Maybe more. Finally, Joseph spoke. "They've gone. For now."
"What about Elijah?" Martha's voice cracked. "What about the others?"
"I don't know." Joseph's face was grave. "When Ezra's men broke through our line, we scattered. I saw Jack fall. Marcus was fighting 3 men at once. Elijah—" He paused. "Elijah was still fighting when I ran."
"We have to go back."
"Not yet. Ezra's men are still searching. If we go back now, we'll be captured."
"I won't leave him." "Mama,"
Samuel's voice was quiet but steady.
"Joseph's right. We can't help Elijah if we're dead."
Martha looked at her son, at the blood on his hands from the rifle's kick, at the fear in his eyes that he was trying so hard to hide.
10 years old, and he just shot a man to save her life. "You were very brave," she whispered. "I was scared."
Samuel's voice shook.
"I'm still scared." "That's what brave means, baby. Doing the right thing even when you're terrified."
She pulled him close, and Tommy and Grace pressed against her other side, and they huddled together in the cold dark while the world outside burned. The marshal arrived at noon, just as Elijah had predicted. Martha heard the hoofbeats from their hiding place, heard the shouts of men who weren't Ezra's. She wanted to run toward them, to scream for help, but Joseph held her back. "Wait, let me look first." He slipped out of the cave and was gone for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When he returned, his face held something Martha hadn't dared to hope for: relief. "It's safe. The marshal has taken control. Ezra's been arrested." Martha's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if Joseph hadn't caught her.
"And Elijah?"
she whispered. "I don't know, but we need to go find out." They made their way back to the cabin slowly, the children exhausted, Martha running on nothing but desperate hope. The scene that greeted them was chaos. Men in badges swarming the property, bodies being carried away, horses milling about. And there, sitting on the porch with a bloody bandage around his arm, was Elijah. Martha ran. She crossed the yard without feeling her feet touch the ground, without seeing anything except him. He looked up as she approached, and his face, his battered, bloody, beautiful face, broke into a smile. "Martha!" She crashed into him, nearly knocking him off the porch, her arms wrapping around him so tight she heard him grunt in pain. She didn't care. He was alive. He was here. Nothing else mattered. "You're alive!" She was crying, she realized, sobbing against his chest like a child. "You're alive! You're alive! You're alive!" Barely. His good arm came up to hold her. "Ezra's men had me dead to rights when the marshal showed up. Another 5 minutes and—" He stopped. "But it doesn't matter. It's over, Martha. It's really over." She pulled back to look at him. "Ezra?" "Under arrest. The marshal found evidence in his saddlebags. Letters to his men ordering them to burn us out, to take you by force if necessary. It was enough to charge him with attempted murder, arson, and kidnapping." Elijah's smile turned grim. "He'll hang, if there's any justice in this world." "And his men?" "Some dead, some captured, some ran." Elijah looked past her to where the children were approaching, Samuel leading the way with Tommy and Grace behind. "What matters is that you're safe, all of you." Samuel stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his rifle still clutched in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. "I shot someone," he said quietly. "I shot Ezra." Elijah met his gaze steadily. "I know." "Is he dead?" "No, wounded. But you slowed him down long enough for your mother to get away." Elijah reached out his good hand. You saved her life, Samuel. You saved all of them." Samuel stared at the hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. "I was scared," he admitted. "Being scared is normal. What matters is what you do when you're scared." Elijah squeezed his hand. "You did good, son. Real good." Son. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Samuel's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back since dawn. "Can I—" his voice cracked. "Can I call you Pa?" Elijah's throat worked. Yeah, you can." Samuel launched himself at Elijah, wrapping his arms around him, finally letting himself cry. Tommy joined in a moment later, then Grace, and then Martha, and they all held each other on that battered porch while the marshal's men worked around them. A family, forged in fire, broken and beaten, but still standing, still together. The territorial marshal was a man named Harold Blackwood, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the weary look of someone who'd seen too much injustice to be surprised by any of it. "Mrs. Stone," he removed his hat as he approached, "I need to take your statement. When you're ready." "Now is fine." Martha wiped her eyes and stood. "The children need to rest, but I can talk now." She told him everything. The months of running, Ezra's threats, the auction where Elijah had bought them, the marriage, the fire, the attack. She told him about William and Daniel and the baby growing inside her, about Ezra's obsession and Garrett's cruelty, and the 23 people in Silver Creek who'd been brave enough to sign their names against a powerful man. Blackwood listened without interrupting, making notes in the small leather book. "This petition," he said when she finished. "Do you have it?" Martha pulled the folded paper from her dress, where she'd kept it close since Agnes gave it to her. "Here." Blackwood read through the names, his eyebrows rising. "These are prominent people. Business owners, ranchers, even the preacher." He looked up at her. "Ezra Wheeler made a lot of enemies." "He made enemies because he treated people like property." Martha's voice was hard. "He thought he could take whatever he wanted, hurt whoever got in his way, and no one would stop him because he had money and power." "And he was wrong." "Yes, he was wrong." Blackwood nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I want you to know that what you've done here, standing up to a man like Wheeler, building a coalition against him, that takes courage. Real courage. I've seen men with guns who weren't half as brave as you." Martha didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. "We'll be taking Wheeler back to the territorial capital for trial," Blackwood continued. "You'll need to testify, you and your husband both. But with the evidence we've gathered, I don't expect it to be a long process." "What will happen to him?" "Best case, life in prison. Worst case, for him, he hangs." Blackwood's face was grim. "Personally, I'm hoping for the rope. Men like Wheeler don't change. They just find new ways to hurt people." Martha thought about Ezra's smile as he'd walked into her cabin, about the certainty in his voice when he told her it was over. "I hope so too," she said quietly. That night, after the marshal and his men had gone, after the children were finally asleep, Martha found Elijah sitting on the porch, staring out at the snow. His arm was in a sling, and bruises were darkening across his face. But he was alive. That was all that mattered. She sat beside him without speaking. "I thought I was going to die today." His voice was rough. "When Ezra's men had me on my knees, when he walked into that cabin to take you, I thought—" He stopped. "I thought I'd failed. Failed you, failed the children, failed everything I'd promised." "You didn't fail." "I almost did. If Samuel hadn't—" Elijah shook his head. "He's 10 years old, Martha. 10 years old, and he shot a man to save his family. What kind of world makes a child do that? The kind of world we live in. Martha took his hand. But he's going to be okay, Elijah. We all are. Because of you. Because of us. He turned to look at her. I couldn't have done any of this alone. You stood by me. You trusted me. You... His voice cracked. You kissed me. Martha felt her cheeks warm despite the cold. I did. Did you mean it? Every second. Elijah lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm. Then I need to tell you something. What? I love you. The words hung in the frozen air between them, more precious than gold. I love you, Martha Stone, Elijah repeated, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I don't know when it started. Maybe that first night, when you stood in my cabin doorway with snow in your hair and 3 terrified children behind you. Maybe later, when I watched you fight for them with everything you had. All I know is that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about protection or debt or doing the right thing. It became about you, about wanting to wake up next to you every morning, about wanting to grow old with you, about wanting to be the man you deserve. Martha felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Elijah, you don't have to say it back. I know this started as a practical arrangement. I know you married me to save your children, not because you loved me. I just needed you to know how I feel. In case... I love you too. Elijah stopped. What? I love you. Martha laughed through her tears. You impossible, stubborn, beautiful man. I love you. I've loved you for weeks. I was just too scared to say it. Scared of what? Scared that it would all fall apart. Scared that I'd lose you like I lost William. Scared that... Her voice broke. Scared that if I let myself love you, it would hurt too much when you were gone. I'm not going anywhere. I know that now. She reached up and cupped his face, mindful of the bruises. I know because you came back. You promised me you would, and you did. And I know that whatever happens next, whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together. Elijah leaned forward and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Together, he agreed against her lips. And for the first time since she'd run from Ezra Wheeler all those months ago, Martha felt truly, completely safe. The weeks that followed Ezra's arrest were the quietest Martha had ever known. Winter deepened around them, snow piling high against the cabin walls. But inside, there was warmth. Real warmth. The kind that came from laughter and shared meals, and children sleeping soundly without nightmares for the first time in months. Elijah's arm healed slowly, the wound leaving a scar that Martha traced with her fingers sometimes at night, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. His bruises faded from purple to yellow to nothing, and bit by bit, the haunted look left his eyes. The children changed, too. Samuel put down his rifle and picked up books instead. Elijah had found a small collection in the cabin's storage, dusty volumes that had belonged to Catherine, and Samuel devoured them with the same intensity he'd once devoted to keeping watch. He was still protective, still watchful, but the desperate edge was gone. He was learning to be a boy again. Tommy talked constantly now, filling the cabin with questions and observations and the kind of innocent chatter that Martha had thought she'd never hear again. He followed Elijah everywhere, helping with chores, learning to care for the horses, asking why about everything under the sun. Elijah answered every question with patience. Martha found remarkable. And Grace. Grace was blooming. She spoke in full sentences now, her voice growing stronger every day. She'd started singing again, soft little songs she made up while she worked on her leather projects, and the sound of her voice was the sweetest thing Martha had ever heard. "Mama?" Grace looked up from the piece of leather she was sewing.
"When the baby comes, can I help take care of it?"
Martha's hand moved to her swollen belly. The baby was due any day now, and she could feel it shifting, restless, eager to meet the world.
"Of course you can, sweetheart. You'll be the best big sister." "Better than Samuel and Tommy?"
"Different than Samuel and Tommy. They'll be good big brothers in their way, and you'll be a good big sister in yours." Grace considered this.
"I want to teach the baby to sew, like Elijah taught me."
"I think the baby would like that very much." Elijah came in from the cold, stamping snow off his boots, and Grace immediately ran to show him her latest project. He crouched down to examine it with the same serious attention he gave everything, pointing out where her stitches were even and suggesting where they could be improved. Martha watched them together, this man who had lost his daughters and this girl who had lost her father, healing each other in ways neither of them fully understood. "You're staring," Elijah said, glancing up at her.
"I'm admiring."
"Admiring what?"
"My family."
Something soft passed across Elijah's face. He stood and crossed to her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Our family," he corrected.
"Our family,"
Martha agreed. The trial took place in early February. Martha and Elijah made the journey to the territorial capital, leaving the children in the care of Agnes Fairfax and Reverend Crane. It was the first time Martha had been separated from them since the auction, and the worry gnawed at her constantly. "They'll be fine," Elijah said for the 100th time. "Agnes would fight off an army to protect them. And the Reverend may be old, but he's got a backbone of steel."
"I know,
You're a mother. Worrying is what you do." The courtroom was packed when they arrived. People from Silver Creek had made the journey, including many of the 23 who had signed the petition. Martha saw faces she recognized, and many she didn't, all of them there to witness the end of Ezra Wheeler's reign. Ezra himself sat at the defendant's table, his arm in a sling from Samuel's bullet, his face pale and drawn. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. When Martha took the stand, she told her story again. The same story she'd told the marshal, the same story she'd lived, but this time she told it to a room full of witnesses, to a judge who listened with grave attention, to a jury of 12 men who would decide Ezra's fate. She told them about William, about Daniel, about the baby she carried, and why. She told them about running, about hiding, about the auction where she and her children had been sold like cattle. And she told them about Elijah. "He saved us," Martha said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Not just our lives, but our souls. He gave us a home when we had nothing. He gave us protection when everyone else had abandoned us. He gave my children a father when they'd lost theirs." She looked at Elijah, sitting in the gallery with his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on her face. "He taught me that there are still good men in this world," she continued. "Men who do the right thing not because it benefits them, but because it's right. Men who stand up for the weak and fight for the innocent, and love without asking for anything in return." She turned back to the jury. "Ezra Wheeler is not that kind of man. He's a predator, a monster who hides behind money and power and the law itself. He doesn't see people as people. He sees them as things to be owned, controlled, possessed." Her voice hardened. "He would have destroyed my family. He would have taken my children and raised them to be like him. And he would have done it all with a smile on his face, convinced he was doing God's work." She stood straighter. "I'm asking you to stop him. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for every other woman who might cross his path, every other family he might try to destroy, every other innocent person he might decide belongs to him." She paused. "Please, don't let him hurt anyone else." The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Ezra's face went white. He turned to look at Martha, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw fear in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "This will never be over. You're mine, Martha. You'll always be mine." "No," Martha's voice was calm. "I'm not yours. I never was. And now the whole world knows it." The judge sentenced Ezra to hang. Martha didn't stay to watch. She walked out of the courtroom with Elijah's hand in hers, out into the cold February sunshine, and she didn't look back. The baby came 3 weeks later. Martha woke in the middle of the night with a familiar tightening in her belly, and she knew immediately what was happening. She'd done this 3 times before. She knew the rhythm, the pain, the relentless progression of labor. "Elijah," she shook his shoulder. "It's time." He was awake instantly, on his feet before his eyes were fully open. "What do you need?" "Hot water, clean cloths, and someone to keep the children occupied." "Samuel can do that." Elijah was already moving, pulling on his boots. "I'll wake him." The next several hours were a blur of pain and effort. Martha had been through this before, but it never got easier. Each contraction felt like her body was trying to tear itself apart, and all she could do was breathe through it and push when pushing was required. Elijah stayed with her the whole time. He held her hand when she needed something to grip. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths when the sweat ran into her eyes. He murmured encouragement when her strength flagged, his voice steady and calm, even when she could see the fear in his eyes. "You're doing so well," he said. "You're almost there. Just a little more." "I can't." "You can. You're the strongest person I know, Martha. You can do anything." And then, finally, with one last push that felt like it might split her in two, the baby came. A wail filled the cabin, thin and strong and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Elijah said, his voice cracking. "Martha, it's a girl." He placed the baby in her arms, this tiny, perfect creature with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were squeezed shut against the light. She was beautiful. She was a miracle. She was everything. "Hello, little one," Martha whispered. "Welcome to the world." The bedroom door creaked open, and 3 faces appeared in the gap. Samuel, Tommy, and Grace, all of them wide-eyed and worried. "Is Mama okay?" Tommy asked. "Mama's fine." Martha smiled at them through her tears. "Come meet your sister." They approached cautiously, as if the baby might startle and disappear. Grace climbed onto the bed first, settling beside Martha to peer at the tiny face. "She's so small," Grace breathed. "You were this small once." "I don't remember." "That's okay. You'll remember meeting her instead." Tommy leaned in close, his nose almost touching the baby's. "What's her name?" Martha looked at Elijah. They'd discussed names, circling around possibilities without ever settling on one. But now, looking at this perfect child, Martha knew exactly what to call her. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Elijah's eyes glistened. "Hope. Because that's what she is, what all of you are." Martha looked at her children, at her husband, at this family they'd built from broken pieces. "You're my hope, every single one of you." Samuel reached out and touched Hope's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his, impossibly small and impossibly strong. "She's holding on to me," Samuel said, wonder in his voice. "She knows you're her brother. She knows you'll protect her." "I will." Samuel's voice was fierce. I'll protect all of you, forever."
"I know you will, baby."
Martha reached out and stroked his hair.
"I know."
Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of brown earth and the first brave shoots of green. The days grew longer, the air warmer, and the ranch came alive with the sounds of animals and birds and children playing. Martha sat on the porch with Hope in her arms, watching Elijah teach Tommy to ride Bessie's replacement, a gentle bay mare they'd named Copper. Tommy sat tall in the saddle, his face split with a grin so wide it looked like it might break, while Elijah walked beside him with a steadying hand on the reins. "He's getting good," Samuel said, dropping onto the step beside her. He'd shot up over the winter, gaining inches seemingly overnight, his face losing the last traces of childhood softness. "He has a good teacher." "Yeah." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Ma, can I ask you something?"
"Always."
"Do you ever think about what would have happened if Elijah hadn't been at that auction?" Martha looked at her son, at this boy who had become a man too fast, who carried scars that might never fully heal. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remember that he was there, and that's all that matters. I used to hate him. I know. I thought he was going to be like Uncle Ezra, another man who wanted to own us." Samuel's jaw tightened. "But he's not. He's nothing like that." "No, he's not. He's a good father." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Martha felt her heart swell. "Yes," she said softly. "He is." Samuel was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "I want to be like him when I grow up. I want to be the kind of man who protects people, who does the right thing even when it's hard." "You already are that kind of man, Samuel." "I'm just a kid." "You're a kid who shot a monster to save his mother." Martha reached out and took his hand. "You're a kid who kept his family together through the worst thing that ever happened to us. You're a kid who learned to be brave when bravery was the only option." She squeezed his fingers. "You're already the man you want to be. You just haven't finished growing into him yet." Samuel's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. "I love you, Ma." "I love you too, baby. More than anything in the world." He leaned against her shoulder, this tall boy who was still her son, and they watched together as Tommy rode in circles around the yard, his laughter carrying on the spring breeze. The first anniversary of their wedding came in late spring. Martha woke to find Elijah already gone from the bed, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the smell of cooking drifting through the cabin, and the sound of children whispering. She got up and made her way to the kitchen, where she found chaos. Elijah stood at the stove, attempting to flip something in a pan, while Tommy clung to his leg and Grace tried to hand him ingredients. Samuel was at the table, wrestling with a bowl of batter that seemed to be winning. Hope sat in her cradle, watching the whole scene with wide eyes. "What on earth is going on?" Everyone froze. "You weren't supposed to be up yet," Tommy said accusingly. "We were making you breakfast," Grace added, "for your anniversary." Martha looked at Elijah, who had flour in his hair and something that might have been egg on his shirt. He shrugged helplessly. "It was supposed to be a surprise." "It's definitely a surprise." Martha crossed to him and kissed his cheek. "What are you making?" "Pancakes. Or we're trying to." He gestured at the pan, where something flat and misshapen was smoking slightly. "I'm better with horses than stoves." "I can see that." Martha took the spatula from his hand. "Why don't you let me take over? You can supervise." "But it was supposed to be special." "It is special," she smiled at him, at all of them, at this chaotic, beautiful family, It's the most special thing anyone's ever done for me." They ate together at the table, the pancakes uneven but edible, laughter filling the cabin. Hope fussed until Martha picked her up, and then she quieted, her small head resting against her mother's shoulder. After breakfast, Elijah asked Martha to walk with him. They left the children with Samuel in charge and made their way to the small rise behind the cabin, where Elijah had planted the garden in the fall. The seeds had taken root over the winter, and now green shoots were pushing up through the soil, reaching for the sun. "I wanted to show you something," Elijah said. He led her to the far corner of the garden, where a small wooden marker stood among the new growth. Martha's breath caught when she saw what was carved into it. Catherine, Emma, Lily, forever loved. "I know they're not buried here," Elijah said quietly. "They're back in Wyoming, on the ranch where we used to live. But I wanted—" His voice broke. "I wanted them to be part of this place too. Part of our family." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Elijah, I've been carrying them alone for 4 years. And then you came, and the children came, and Hope came, and I realized—" He turned to face her. "I realize that I don't have to carry them alone anymore. They're part of me, and I'm part of you, and that means they're part of all of us. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. I want to tell the children about them, about Catherine and Emma and Lily. I want them to know that they weren't my first family, but they're my last, my forever family." He took her hands. "If that's okay with you." "It's more than okay." Martha squeezed his fingers. "Tell them everything. Tell them about Catherine's temper and Emma's laugh and Lily's love of horses. Let them know the people who made you who you are." Elijah pulled her close and held her, his face buried in her hair. "I love you, Martha Stone." "I love you too, Elijah Stone." They stood together in the spring sunshine, surrounded by new growth and old memory, and let the warmth soak into their bones. The summer brought visitors. Agnes Fairfax came first, bringing fabric and news from town. Ezra's execution had taken place in April, she reported, witnessed by a crowd that included many of his former victims. His estate had been seized by the territorial government and divided among those he'd wronged. "There's money coming to you," Agnes said. "Not a fortune, but enough. Compensation for what you suffered." Martha didn't know how to feel about that. Taking money from Ezra, even money that had been taken from him, felt wrong somehow, tainted. "Give it to the town," she said finally. "Build something good with it. A school maybe, or a hospital." Agnes's eyebrows rose. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I don't want anything of his, not even his money." Reverend Crane came next, bringing books for Samuel and prayers for the family. He baptized Hope in a small ceremony by the creek, water from the mountain flowing over her tiny head while she wailed with indignation. "She's got strong lungs," the Reverend observed. "She gets that from her mother," Elijah said, earning an elbow in the ribs from Martha. Joseph Running Bear came too, appearing one morning without warning, as was his way. He spent 3 days with them, teaching Grace to track animals through the forest, showing Tommy how to read the weather in the clouds, sharing stories around the fire that made even Samuel laugh. On his last night, he pulled Martha aside. "Your daughter is special," he said, nodding toward Grace. "She has the gift of seeing, of understanding things others miss." "What do you mean?" "I mean she will be a healer one day. Not of bodies, but of hearts. She knows how it feels to be broken, and that knowledge will help her mend others." Joseph smiled. "Guard her well. She has important work to do." Martha watched Grace, who was showing Hope the leather pouch she'd made, her small face alight with pride. "I will," Martha promised. "I'll guard all of them." "I know." Joseph touched her shoulder. "That's why the spirits led you here. to this place, to this man, to this life. It was all meant to be. Martha didn't know if she believed in spirits or fate or meant to be. But she believed in what she could see and touch and hold. She believed in her children's laughter and her husband's love and the home they'd built together from nothing. And maybe that was enough. 2 years later, on a warm September afternoon, Martha stood on the porch and watched her family. Samuel, now 12, was working with Elijah to repair a fence line, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew his place in the world. He'd grown tall, taller than Martha now, with William's eyes and Elijah's steadiness. Tommy, 9 and eternally curious, was teaching Hope to walk. The toddler took wobbling steps toward him, her face screwed up with concentration, while Tommy held out his hands and encouraged her forward. Grace sat on the porch steps, a book in her lap but her eyes on the horizon. She'd started reading voraciously over the past year, consuming every book Elijah brought home from town, and she'd announced recently that she wanted to become a teacher. Like Catherine, she'd said, and Martha had seen Elijah's eyes fill with tears. Now, watching her daughter dream of a future that had once seemed impossible, Martha felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Real peace. The kind she'd stopped believing in during those long months of running. Elijah looked up from his work and caught her eye. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip, and raised a hand in greeting. Martha waved back. They built something here, something real and lasting and good. Not perfect. Nothing was perfect. But good. Strong enough to weather storms, deep enough to put down roots. Hope reached Tommy and grabbed his fingers, squealing with delight at her accomplishment. Tommy scooped her up and spun her around, and her laughter rang across the yard like bells. Grace looked up from her book. "Mama, are you crying?" Martha touched her cheek and realized she was. "Happy tears, baby." "What are you happy about?" Martha looked at her family, at Samuel and Elijah working side by side, at Tommy and Hope playing in the yard, at Grace growing into the remarkable woman she was meant to be. "Everything," Martha said. "I'm happy about everything." That night, after the children were asleep, Martha and Elijah sat on the porch like they did every evening. The stars were bright overhead, and the air smelled of autumn coming, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled at the moon. "What are you thinking about?" Elijah asked. Martha leaned against his shoulder. "I'm thinking about that day at the auction, when you bought us for $12. Best $12 I ever spent." "Why did you do it?" Martha had asked him this before, but she wanted to hear the answer again, wanted to hold it close and remember. "Because it was wrong." Elijah's voice was soft. "Because you needed help, and I could give it. Because—" He paused. "Because I saw you standing there with your children, ready to fight the whole world to protect them, and I thought if Catherine could see me, if she could see what I'd become, she'd be ashamed. She'd want me to be better, to do better. And now?" "Now?" Elijah pulled her closer. "Now I think she'd be proud. I think she'd look at our family and she'd smile. I think she'd say—" His voice cracked. "I think she'd say I finally got it right." Martha reached up and touched his face. "You did get it right. We both did." "Even though it started with an auction?" "Even though it started with an auction." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Elijah?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad your wagon wheel broke that day." He laughed, a sound that still surprised her sometimes with its warmth. "Me too. Me too." Martha closed her eyes and let herself feel everything. The solid warmth of her husband beside her, the quiet sounds of her children sleeping, the soft breath of the wind through the trees. 3 years ago, she'd been running for her life with 3 terrified children and a baby in her belly. She'd been sold at auction like livestock. She'd believed that safety and love and hope were things that happened to other people, not to her. Now she had all 3, and more. She had a husband who loved her without condition, children who were thriving, a home that was truly hers, a future that stretched out before her, full of possibility. She had everything she'd ever wanted, and more than she'd ever dared to dream. And it had all started with $12 and a stranger's kindness. Martha Stone opened her eyes and looked at the life she'd built, the life they'd built together, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because fate had decreed it, not because the spirits had guided her, but because she had chosen it, because she had fought for it, because she had refused to give up, even when giving up seemed like the only option. That was the truth of her story, the real miracle. She had survived. Her children had survived. And out of the wreckage of loss and fear and desperate flight, they had built something beautiful. A family, a home, a love that would last forever. And that was worth more than $12. Worth more than gold or land or anything else the world could offer. It was worth everything.